Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for this conversation about the mission of God for our Living on Mission cohort. We're excited to be kicking off the Living on Mission cohort with this discussion, with this conversation about God's mission. And really, the reason we're having this conversation first is because if we want to live on mission, if you signed up for this cohort, you joined this cohort, and you're excited about growing in living on mission in our city and in our world, we first need to know what the mission is, right? Where does that, what is God's mission for our life? What's his purpose for our life? And that begins with going back to scripture. And so I'm excited to have Spencer and Sarah Bauer here with me to talk with us about this, because this is something the two of you have been talking about, studying for lots of years. First of all, actually, could you just maybe introduce yourselves and what brought you to LA? What brought you to Cornerstone, real briefly?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Spencer Bauer, and my wife is right across the table from me. And we moved to LA in late 2019, which means that we basically had like 2 or 3 golden months of pre-COVID LA. But we moved to LA because we are on staff with a ministry called Bridges International, which is the international student ministry of Cru. And so we're primarily at UCLA and USC, and just love to get to welcome international students from all around the world and hear their stories and welcome them to our great city of LA, and also welcome them to faith.
So, Sarah, maybe real briefly, I mean, what did that look like? You came to LA, and a couple months later, COVID hit, and you guys what did ministry look like during that time?
Yeah, it was a little wild, I think, as it was for everybody. We went online with a lot of our ministry. At both of our campuses, we had a large group meeting already happening every week. And so we just tried to recreate that on Zoom with different fun games, and we had Bible discussions and small groups and different things. But I think everybody was relieved to move it back in person.
Yeah. And at this point, things are back very much normal. Big group meetings, in-person meetings. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your ministry, but we've done that other times in other places, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. But today, what we're going to be doing is talking about the mission of God. And again, for our cohort, this first session is going to be focused on the mission of God in the Bible, right? We're going to look back at what does God's word say about his mission. The second session of the cohort, we're going to look at the mission of God throughout history. Right? We're going to look at both our own local church's history. We're going to look big picture at history. Obviously, we can't do that exhaustively, but we're going to take some snapshots to see how other people have lived this out in other places and in this place throughout history. In our third session, we're going to look at the mission of God in West LA. So what does it look like for us to live on mission here in LA? And in our fourth session, we're going to look at the mission of God throughout the world. What does it look like for us to be a part of that and contribute to the mission of God across the globe? But again, this all starts with what God says about the mission in his word. And so maybe by way of introduction, I'd love for each of you to share a little bit about how God first started to open your eyes to his mission and how that has shaped your lives.
Yeah, I can go first. So I'm originally from Kansas, grew up in Wichita, Kansas, grew up going to church every Sunday. I was very familiar with summer camp and VBS and the whole 9 yards. And man, I knew about missions for a while, but for many years it was just one slice of the pie. It was one of many things that the church did, and honestly, it was something that it was for it was for varsity Christians. There's different things that the church did, and you could kind of pick and choose. And but I remember when I went off to college, my sophomore year, I was living in the dorms. I didn't have a roommate, and so the university just gave me a random one, and it ended up being an international student from China. And let me tell you, that kind of rocked my world, because up until that point, I I had just been living with people that looked like me, talked like me. People had a general idea of Jesus and the Bible. And here was my friend Musin, who literally crossed an ocean. He had only been in the U.S. for about 3 days when I first met him. And we quickly hit it off. We quickly became really good friends. And we did a lot of fun stuff. I took him to all of his now favorite restaurants in Manhattan, Kansas, and he showed me that there's like secret menus at Chinese restaurants, and we really had this great friendship. And then one Sunday morning, I was getting ready to leave for church, and Musin asked me. He said, "Oh, where are you going? Church? I've never heard of church before." And I realized that Musin had never read the Bible in his own language. He didn't even know there was one in Chinese. He had never stepped foot inside of a church, and it was just crazy to me that I had heard Jesus died for my sins my entire life. And here was one of my good friends who literally had to cross an ocean and be randomly placed as my roommate in order for him to first hear the gospel from me. And I think in many ways that just like shook me in my Christianity. It shook me out of my Christianity, which I realized was kind of all about me. Man, I realized that God has a heart for me, but God also has a heart for Musin. And I really just had a heart only for myself. I was looking for friends and popularity and success, and my Christianity was just another means to that. I think for many of us, we're living out of our faith without a clear center. Without a clear center to it. We do church things and we evaluate what's good or important in the church. And, just like I was saying, that the church does a lot of things, from Sunday services to harvest festivals to discipleship communities. But what I hope that we can show you in this podcast is just that the mission of God isn't just one of the many good things the church does, but it's an overarching purpose why the church exists.
Yeah.
What about you, Sarah? Did you guys know each other at this point?
No.
You didn't?
Yeah. We met later in college.
This is my life pre-Sarah.
It was God's mercy that we did not know each other. Figure this out on our own and then get together.
That's true. I would have been really intimidated if I would have met Sarah my sophomore year. I was still learning how to talk to girls, I think, at that point.
So how did God first start to open your eyes to his mission?
Yeah, so it was kind of around the same time for me. I also grew up in church, but I would say, my freshman year of college was when I really started to live it out on my own. I was, my parents weren't taking me to church anymore. I had to choose to press into my walk with God and pursue that. And I went to a summer training project the summer after my freshman year, where we learned how to just be spiritual leaders, how to study the Bible, how to share our faith. And one weekend we had a missions conference. And I thought it was kind of interesting. We're spending the whole weekend on missions. What does that look like? And so we went and met with a bunch of other college students who were also on summer projects. And a speaker went through a lot of what we're actually going to talk about today. He started in Genesis and he walked through the whole Bible to Revelation and showed that the Bible is not just 66 books that have different themes, but it has an overarching story of God being glorified among the whole earth and all nations. And he highlighted in a lot of the stories that I had heard before, this theme. And I was astounded. I think I remember opening up my Bible and checking to make sure that he didn't have some heretical version, wait, I totally did not see that there before. So that really is where it started. And God just continued as I matured more in my faith in college to show me his mission for all nations, and even that he wanted to use me as a college woman still growing in my own faith to help others see who Jesus is for the first time, and even people from places like Musin, who maybe haven't had the opportunity to hear about Jesus.
So I think hearing both of you talk, I think people might even be asking themselves, okay, wait, so is this, when we talk about the mission throughout the Bible, is this about missions? Is this about global missions, or is this about me living my life in West LA? Which one are we talking about?
Both. It's definitely bigger than missions. I think I'm Scott. It's just like one letter between mission, you'd say the mission of God, and missions, plural.
Yeah.
I would say missions, plural, is a subset of the mission of God.
Okay.
When we talk about the mission of God, we're talking about what is on God's heart. What's his motivating impulse that we see throughout all of history? How can you pull together all of God's actions into one purpose? And that would be the mission of God. Now, inside of that, I mean, there's kind of two contexts for that. One would be within our own borders here in the U.S. or even within the city limits of L.A. But as we're going to see, man, God isn't just the God of the U.S. or of just one nation, not just the people of Israel or anything, but man, God from the very beginning has had a heart for all nations. And so you see that missions, plural piece happen when people decide to cross a culture, cross some sort of boundary to take the gospel out of their cultural identity or where they're from.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is super exciting to me, right? Because that means like we're talking about all of life. We're talking about all of God and his work in all the world, including here. We're talking about the heart of God, both understanding and attuning ourselves to the heart of God. So where does that start? Right? Like if you were to, begin in the Bible and say, where does God start to communicate about that in his word?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott, because you really can't get any bigger than this. Like what we're, listener, beware, buckle up. I don't know. Maybe you're on a long car trip. We're about to throw literally the whole book at you, the entire Bible, Genesis to Revelation, because we want to trace out, and we're going to go really fast, because we're going to need to. There's 66 books. There's a lot of verses here, Scott. Probably. I hopefully I didn't make Scott nervous with the amount of verses that I have on this sheet.
He's got this sheet, man. You have multiple sheets all right there in front of you.
Yes. And so the next, this is the promise that I make to you, the listener. The next, let's say 45, 50 minutes, we are going to start in Genesis and work our way from cover to cover and end in Revelation, really tracing out the story of God. And any good story has three parts. It has a beginning, a middle, in the end. And so, Scott, where does the mission of God start? It starts in the beginning. Literally Genesis 1:1, the very first page of the Bible. God creates heaven and the earth, the animals, the stars, and he creates Adam and Eve. And in Genesis 1:27 and 1:28, this is what God says. This is what it says. And it says, "And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." And what we see is from the very first pages of the Bible that God is already showing us his heart. God wants to see a world filled with worshipers who know and love him. And it's actually interesting because God repeats himself a few chapters later in Genesis 9 with Noah. And as Noah is walking off the ark, God says this in Genesis 9:1, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." And what we see is God is already repeating this theme that we're going to see throughout the entire Bible. He's already repeating what is on his heart. And his heart is what I just said. From the very beginning, God wants to see a world filled with worshipers who know and love him. And we see that priority.
Man, that's so cool. As you said that, the picture that came to my mind was as Noah was stepping off the ark, I was imagining what this portion of the earth where we are sitting right now was like. And it was a marshy, empty bog.
Yeah.
Right? Like when Noah stepped off the ark, there were no humans here. And so this place that we know for traffic and for congestion and for density, right, is in essence an application, even in some ways, of the, like we are living out parts of this and this mission that's just continuing to go and go and go. So, anyways, I don't want to sidetrack us, but it is a picture that came to my mind. And, it's cool to imagine both Noah hearing that and us hearing it sitting here. But okay, so where does this mission go from there?
Yeah, that is crazy to think about. And it's a big thing for God to ask, even as there are no other humans, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, multiply, fill this place that has nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you're like, there seems to be a lot of it.
Yeah.
Um,
So Noah obeyed. Maybe didn't obey all the time super well, but he did. His family multiplied and started to fill the earth. But then something happens a couple chapters later that goes against that. In Genesis 11, we hit the Tower of Babel, and the people do the opposite thing. They want to get together instead of separate, and they build a tower for themselves instead of for God's glory.
Yeah, talk about direct disobedience.
Yeah.
It said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And people are like, no, let's gather. Let's just build our own thing.
Yeah. So God spreads them out. And then the next chapter begins with Abraham. And God comes to Abraham and he says something really profound. And I'll read Genesis 12, 1-3. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your kindred, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." So that's really awesome so far. He's like, hey, I'm going to follow me. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to just bless your socks off, and make your name great and your family. And then he goes on to say, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So here we see that this blessing has a purpose. It has a plan. Abraham was blessed to be a blessing to all nations. God wants to use this one man and his family to bless all people on earth and see this mission continue.
So he's not just blessed so that God can be glorified just in him, right? But there's this purpose that he's received this blessing for, which I think we just see continue to reverberate. But so where do we go? So how does that same theme then, this fill the earth, be blessed, to be a blessing for all the families of the earth? How do we see that theme repeat itself throughout the Old Testament?
Yeah. Well, it continues even as God comes and directs Isaac, Abraham's son. He says something similar. He said, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heavens, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And same to Jacob. He says something similar in Genesis 28. All families of the earth shall be blessed through his offspring. And then we kind of see that in some of the historical narratives, some of the stories, that we're really familiar with, like David and Goliath. Whenever I heard the story of David and Goliath growing up, I always thought, oh yeah, overcoming your giants, but no, this is like the most pivotal verse, I think, in the story. In 1 Samuel 17:46, when David is smack talking Goliath before he's getting ready to take him down, before God's getting ready to take him down. He says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. So even in that, that really big moment when God is getting ready to give over the Philistines, David knows that, and he knows the purpose is that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel.
Yeah, so we've seen from the very beginning that God has this vision for the future, this reality that he wants to see, this world filled with worshipers who know and love him. And we see in Genesis 12 the means. Man, God has come to one man, and he kind of interrupts his life rudely. And he sets up this pattern where he says, hey, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you incredible promises. But those promises, those victories are going to have a global purpose, and that it's going to be God's glory known throughout the entire earth. And that's exactly what Sarah just said with David and Goliath. Man, God is going to give the Israelites victory so that God is glorified in the whole earth. And I think another story in the Old Testament comes from 1 Kings 4:34. And it's talking about King Solomon, who was the wisest and maybe the richest man in the entire world. And in 1 Kings 4:34, it says, and people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Man, people were traveling miles and miles, long ways away to come and see the knowledge, the order, the wisdom, the law that God had set up for God's people in Israel under Solomon.
Yeah, and we even see that too in the 10 Commandments. I just want to look at Deuteronomy 28, 9-10. And it says, the Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord. So even there, we see as we are obedient to God, that should point to God, and that it's an example to, here it says, all peoples of the earth seeing God's glory.
Yeah. And we just see this, Scott. We could just keep going and going.
Yeah.
So let us know how much time we have. We could just keep hitting these.
Okay, so these are some of the narrative, right, snapshots that we get. Like what about the other parts of the Old Testament, right? Whether it's the wisdom literature or prophets, how does this same mission show itself? Or how is it demonstrated throughout some of these other parts of the Old Testament?
Yeah, man, it's all over the Psalms. And Sarah, I might let you take this one in just a second. But one time I was just sitting down, I was like, man, I started to see this in the Psalm after Psalm after Psalm. And I went through and I counted, and there was hundreds and hundreds of times where we see that theme, where God is going to bless his people and he's moving to make his glory known among all nations. It's not just for the people of Israel, but he wants to use them, one nation, to reach all the other nations for his glory. And so, I don't know, Sarah, would one psalm come to mind?
Yeah, I think one that surprises me sometimes is Psalm 46:10. This is like one of the most popular ones to be printed on coffee mugs, or like calligraphy.
Right.
Be still and know that I am God. Right. And I always thought that was the extent of that verse. But I realized that was just A. And sometimes they'll even print A on those things too.
Right. It's like the first half
just
of
the
the
first
verse.
half of the verse. Yeah.
Just
Yes,
the first half of the verse. Yeah. And so I wondered what's the full Psalm 46:10. It's actually, be still and know that I'm God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So even, popular ones like that, sometimes it's so easy for us to just take the things that feel good, like be still and know that I am God, like have peace in God. But even that is for a purpose of being exalted among the nations. God wants to glorify himself through the blessings he gives us.
Yeah, and God gives us really great, powerful, and precious promises throughout the Bible, and they are for us. We should take them and cherish them. I even remember just a few months ago, Pastor Reggie preached through this Psalm 46, and it was such a nourishment to my soul, because it was talking about the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God, the mercy of God to me. But God's promises aren't supposed to just end with us, but he has blessed us, given us salvation and all these promises, not only for us as an end in itself, but he wants us to see those be passed on all the way to all nations.
Okay, so I would love to actually push pause as we're kind of running through the Old Testament at this point, and let you. I feel like we've been using this similar vocabulary, but I'd love for you to just summarize as you look back through the Old Testament and you look at God's purpose, right? His mission, what he's doing. We're using phrases like all nations, like the spread of his glory, like blessing, like blessed to be a blessing. And I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here, but how would you put that all together? And if you were to describe, if somebody were to ask you, what does the Old Testament teach us about the mission of God? And think like elevator pitch, right? Like you've got 3 floors and they're about to step out of the elevator. How would you summarize it?
I would say that God is the greatest being in the universe. He's the most powerful. He created you and me. And just by that, in his nature and his character, he's worthy to be worshiped. But God doesn't come to us in a strong way or in a forceful way where he imposes what is his due as worship, but he is using his people to draw people to himself. And man, God deserves to be glorified, and that just means to be seen as valuable, the most valuable, to be the priority. And God is worthy of that, of every single human being that he has made. And that's me, that's you, that's the person down the street who's never considered much about their spiritual life.
Absolutely. So then, Sarah, how do God's people fit into that? Right? If he wants to use his people to draw him, I feel like you've talked about it a couple of times, but I just kind of want to summarize so we can just sit in it for a minute before we just kind of run on with more passages. How would you summarize how God's people, the purpose God has for his people in the spread of that, in the recognition of that glory?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, man, it's amazing to read some of these stories in the Old Testament because he, like Spencer said, he doesn't have to do it. And even some of these people weren't like the most obedient always. They made mistakes, but yet God's glory is more powerful than that. But he does want to use our obedience and faithfulness and, whatever we have, our weakness even, to be able to showcase himself. So I think you see that example in lots of different ways throughout the Old Testament.
So that's interesting, because what I hear you say is that like he's using us to spread his glory both through blessing, right? By blessing us, by blessing his people so they could be a blessing, and through his grace, by giving grace to his people that they might see his glory and be a blessing.
And I love what you were even saying, Sarah, because he's inviting us in and he wants to use us, even sometimes in spite of us or even beyond our failings. I mean, we just talked about Psalms, but if you just keep going into some of the prophets, I mean, when you think Old Testament missionary or somebody that, God used, they'd be the prophets. And one of the prophets that comes to mind is Jonah. And Jonah is a guy that God used for his glory, like in spite of Jonah. Like Jonah might be an example of one of the worst missionaries I can think of, like God told him to go. God has this heart, not only for the people of Israel, Jonah's people, but also for the Ninevites. And so God comes to Jonah and tells Jonah to go. And Jonah says, no, I don't want to go because I know your character, God. I know that you are gracious, merciful, abounding in steadfast love. And I really don't like that nation over there. I don't like the Ninevites. And so he turns and he goes the exact opposite direction. And the entire story of Jonah is not only God trying to reach all nations, but it's God trying to reach Jonah. And God has invited us, his people, into his mission. And that includes inviting us into not only experiencing the grace and mercy for ourselves, but also inviting us into the joy of seeing that grace, mercy, goodness go to people who haven't heard it before.
Okay, so you both keep using this language of us, right? Like God is calling us and he's working in us. But so far we've basically looked at the Old Testament and God's call on his people, which in that context was the nation of Israel. How do these things get, and this call, how does this mission get applied to us as Christians? And how does God kind of lay out this, really the next iteration of this mission in the New Testament?
Well, yeah, you turn the page after the prophets of Malachi and you hit the Gospels, the biography of Jesus, and you look at the life of Jesus. And when you do, you see that he had the same heart as the Father, that Jesus, man, and he lived it out. Man, so much of his ministry was to his own people, but it was also to the people across the Sea of Galilee, into the Decapolis, or to people, the nations of his day. And at the culmination of his ministry, we know Jesus died and then rose again from the dead. And after that is where we get what a lot of people have coined the Great Commission, which for most of my life was, I thought, just one verse kind of tucked in at the end of Matthew. But actually, the Great Commission is 5 different verses and 5 different books of the Bible. And we're there's not just one. And I start to think to myself, like, why did Jesus repeat himself so many times? We see it at the end of Matthew 28:19. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. But we also see it in Mark 16:15. And he said, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. We see this in Luke 24:46-49. And he said to them, thus it is written that Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins, the gospel, should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. And we see it again in John, the end of the book of John, John 20:21. Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. And so even right there, you talk about like this us language. How do we connected? Well, Christian, if you are connected to Jesus, then we are given the same commission, the same mission that Jesus was. In John 20:21, as the Father has sent me, as the Father has sent Jesus, even so I am sending you. And the fifth one, the final Great Commission text is in Acts 1:8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. Why? And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And man, there's many important things that are only mentioned in one of the gospel accounts, and many more important things, that are maybe in two or three of them. However, the Great Commission is repeated in all four of the gospels and in the book of Acts. Jesus, before his resurrection, talked about a lot of things, but after he came back and he met with his disciples and the 500 witnesses, this was his theme over and over again, that God has blessed his people with the gospel, but it's not just for our own community, not just for the church itself, but we have been sent. We are a commissioned church to see that gospel go to all nations, that the world may know that there's a God in Israel, like David said.
Okay, so I want to maybe look at a couple more of these New Testament passages, but I want to stop and just sit on these Great Commission passages for just a second, because I feel like what you're saying is so profound, right? That God has had this mission, had this purpose in the world since creation, that we see it working through his people throughout all of salvation history, throughout all of the history of Israel. And then Jesus comes, and this is what Jesus does. Right? This is what he did on earth. And repeatedly, right, was scandalized people, because he's like, no, I'm not just here for Israel, right? I'm here for the Gentiles. I'm here for the nations. I'm here for the whole world. And then after his death and resurrection, accomplishing that salvation for us, he then gives this clear instruction. And really, I mean, this is the crux of how we understand God's purpose for our lives as Christians, is to understand the instructions Jesus left for his disciples. And maybe, Sarah, I'd love for you to maybe reflect on when you hear those passages, how does that strike home for you? Because how is that not just Jesus' instruction for his disciples, or for certain leaders, right? Or for maybe, apostles or pastors in the church. How and why does that connect home with you and your purpose, for your understanding of your purpose for your life?
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm kind of putting you on the place. We're going a little bit off a script here, but
That's great. Man, I think, just even seeing throughout the Gospels, how Jesus includes lots of different people. It wasn't just like important, well-educated, teachers. He had, people in his following who were from lots of different places, women, even Gentiles, and so the fact that, even in his own ministry and in the apostles' ministry, it was so diverse. There's space for everybody.
Yeah.
He wants to use everybody. And even from that too, I don't know, I feel like it kind of connects to Romans 10, where he kind of talks, where Paul even gives some different roles, like this mission looks different in everyone's life. Like for me, as a mom of a toddler, it looks a little different than Spencer. It looks a little different than you, Scott, as a pastor.
Yeah.
And yeah, Romans 10, I'm even thinking about these three verses, 13 through 15, which say, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." We see several different individuals in here, and they're essential, each one in their own role. People who are preaching, people who are sent, and people who are sending them. So I think, just even seeing that the whole church needs to be involved in this and each of our different roles.
Man, I love that. And I think that's it's so helpful and clarifying to see that we all have this same mission and that God calls us to participate in it in all sorts of different unique ways, right? In different stages of our life, given different gifts, given different callings, given different placements in the world. But that God's purpose isn't that just a select number of Christians would have this mission, but that we, as his church, would have it. That's such a powerful vision.
Yeah, I think another verse that comes to my mind kind of connected with that is Galatians 3:29, which says, "And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise." And here we see a New Testament epistle verse connecting us all the way back to Abraham. That same promise, when it says heirs according to the promise, it takes us all the way back to that really foundational verse, Genesis 12:1-3. Where God says, "I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great." Like there's the promise. I'm going to make a great family through you, but the promise comes with the purpose. And so in the same way that we are in Abraham's family, we get the promises. In the same way we are in Abraham's family, we get the same purpose. And so I think it's easy for me to live on the promise side and maybe forget about my invitation, my responsibility to live on the purpose side.
I think that's both clarifying and convicting. I mean, I think it's convicting for all of us. So, okay, so I want to ask the question, I mean, how long, you talked about when you first were exposed to this and first started thinking about the mission of God and his place for you in it. So how has that developed over the years, right? Because I think somebody might be listening to this and they're like, yeah, I have heard this before. Oh my goodness, this is a really helpful reminder of maybe something that has like shaded to the back in my mind. Maybe somebody's like, oh, I'm living this and this is such a great encouragement. There may be some people that are like, whoa, that's new. And you just quoted a lot of scripture, and like I don't even know.
And go back and double check me.
Yeah, for sure, right. But if somebody's like relatively new to thinking about and seeing the mission of God throughout Scripture, how would you describe your process of both developing, continuing to learn about God's mission and your part in it?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is kind of echo what Sarah just read from Romans 10, that there's different roles. And so different seasons of your life is going to look differently. I know for me, when I started seeing this, I didn't get on a plane to the other side of the world the next day. It was a process for me. And maybe the second encouragement kind of related to that is to just take the next step. I think this is a Elizabeth Elliot quote, but she says, when you don't know what to do, just do the next thing. And, getting involved with the mission of God, my own bent is to think about the furthest extent of that. And that would be that missions, plural, that we talked about at the beginning. But man, all of us have a responsibility and an opportunity to be involved with the mission of God right where they're at. And just like Sarah said, like, I'd say just take that one next step. You know, maybe for some of you, it's, man, this is all totally new. This is kind of, a shell shock of verses, and I need to kind of sit and think about this and pray about it. So maybe that's the next step, is just dig into this theme. And man, I think if you're anything like me, you're going to start to see this everywhere, where God makes a promise, and it's always connected to His glory among going further in the world, His glory among all the nations, people who don't know Him. Yeah, I think maybe the last thing with that is just, it's not just like you start small and then the next step is always something bigger. I think the next step is different. When I first found this out, when my God started opening my eyes to this, I was a single guy in college. And so my schedule, my rhythms, my responsibilities freed me up to jump into His mission in certain ways. And then I graduated and I had my first job, and then a couple of years. And so that was a different season. And then a couple of years later, me and Sarah got married, and that was a different season. And then we moved to LA. And so I think it always, for us, there's just this exciting, it's not stagnant, this exciting journey of figuring out, man, what does it look like for us, me and Sarah and Nora now, to be faithful in the season that we're in, to be involved with the mission of God wherever He's placed us for this season now.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would even just add too here, this is something that God calls us to for our joy and our good. It's not like a job, like something you have to do. But I love, even in that Galatians verse, it talks about where Abraham's offspring, his heirs of the promise. Like, where this is our inheritance, this promise, and this, what God's inviting us into. It's like a father inviting their son or daughter to go along with them to work and teach them what they love doing, So it's exciting, I think. And it's meant to bring you joy, Christian, as you step into God's mission for your life.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about. Like, I love hanging out with my daughter, Nora, but the joy does not come from the efficiency and the productivity that Nora brings. Like, if I have a job, like I'm trying to sweep off our driveway and Nora's like, hey, where's my broom? Like, I want to be involved. Like, that brings me a lot of joy, but not because I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to be able to get this job done a lot easier and quicker now. Man, the joy, God doesn't need us, but He wants to use us. He doesn't need us in a sense that He is, He couldn't do it some other way or through some other people, but this is the way He has invited us into this, and He wants to join with us in a relationship for the same mission. Yeah, I think the way you put it, Sarah, is really good, because like the mission of God, like that's just the family business. It's what we get to be a part of in relationship with our Father.
Yeah, and as we are, and that I think also helps us to remember that this is for every Christian, right? This is who we are. This is it, with our new identity in Christ. We're also given a new mission, a new purpose for being here, and we have various callings in which that manifests itself. But behind all of that is this big M mission of the spread of God's glory, and for our good and for our joy, and for ultimately for His glory. So you promised Genesis to Revelation. I think we've only ever gotten as far as, like, I don't know, maybe Galatians. Do we see this? How does the story end?
Yeah. Well, when we go to the end, the last book,
there's good news.
There's good news. Spoiler alert. I love in Revelation 7:9, this answers what God has been accomplishing up to this point. It says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Here we see, everything that's been happening up to this point has been for the purpose of God's glory being known among the nations. And here it is. here are the nations, every nation worshiping the Father before the throne. So what God set out to accomplish in Genesis, he gets.
And the confidence that we can have knowing that that end is secured is so powerful, right? That that this is all working towards this great end. And I think about too, I guess we get to participate, and if that's how it ends, then that shapes how we engage now, right? What's most important to us now, and even what we engage in together.
Totally.
Well, so this has been a very, very quick fly through of the mission of God throughout. I mean, we could spend so much time looking at any of these different passages. We could spend so much. We're going to talk some more in our next session about the Great Commission passages. Look at those a little bit more deeply. There's so many different stories in the Old Testament, so many different Psalms, like you said, we could go to that demonstrate God's goal in the spread of his glory across the earth. And I think our hopes are that people would catch a glimpse of this, hear this introduction, and as they open up their Bibles, see it, because it is, I mean, just on just about every page, that through this they would see how God is working in and has been working throughout history and is working in his church. But in order to facilitate that, that's why we're doing this cohort, right? That's why we're starting here with this foundational understanding of the mission, and then spending some time talking about how has that looked throughout history, and what does that look like here in Los Angeles, and in what ways can we be involved across the earth. So as I know that the two of you were particularly excited about this cohort, about the fact that we're doing this as a church family. I would love to know what it is about what is in store over the next few months for people listening to this. What it is about that you're excited about, and what your hopes are for our church and for our people.
Yeah. It's really exciting to do something by yourself. But it's way more fun to do it together, I think. And I mean, there are lots of people living out God's mission in their lives in our church already, but I'm excited to just see how, we can just continue to link arms in an even more powerful way during and through this cohort, and just encourage each other, and what God has been doing and is maybe wants to do through our church. That would be one thing I would say I'm really excited for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really excited just to think about just the great opportunity that we have to jump into, again, what something that God has been about since Genesis, and he's been faithfully moving to see to fulfillment throughout the entire Bible. I mean, the entire Bible points to Revelation 7:9. All of history is moving to make that happen. I mean, in a sense, we just jumped ahead when we said Revelation. Like, we're in between. Yeah. I think Galatians was the last verse we said, and then Revelation. And so it's just really exciting to think about. Like, we are in that same trajectory, and that Revelation 7:9 picture, like, that is a part of our future. Like, it's a future reality. Like, it's on our calendars. Like, I don't know where I can't tell you the day, but like, I got up this morning and I ate breakfast. Tomorrow I have some plans. Next week I have some plans. And eventually down the road, we're going to get to this vision of heaven that is Revelation 7:9. And I just get really excited about this cohort because, just like Sarah said, we get to do that alongside God and alongside one another. I think one thing in particular in this, as far as how we've built out this cohort, that I'm really excited for is the second set of content where we look at the history of the mission of God, because it didn't just end with Acts. Just like we are in between Galatians and Revelation, there's 2,000 years of Christian church history that we get to dig into and be encouraged by. Of people also living for the mission of God in their very different from our own context.
Absolutely. Well, as we go through the following sessions, there's going to be a lot of different resources, some articles to read, audio to listen to, websites to visit, and a number of book recommendations. But I'd love for the two of you to share any recommendations you have on if people are intrigued, even just on the understanding more deeply the biblical story and how the mission of God is revealed through the biblical story. If people want to take a little bit of a deeper dive or have more questions about that, or want to go deeper on the things we just kind of scratched the surface of in this podcast, are there any recommendations you'd make to go a little bit deeper?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like this is obvious, but it's just studying your Bible with
Read
this
your
in
Bible.
mind.
That's right.
But seriously, like
Yeah.
pick a book and just study, just read through and highlight everywhere it talks about all nations or God's blessing to be blessed to the whole world is huge, I think. But outside of that, Spencer and I both worked for a ministry called the Traveling Team before we worked with Bridges. And one of the guys on staff with the Traveling Team, Todd, wrote a book called The Abrahamic Revolution. And a lot of that book is just kind of taking this idea from Genesis to Revelation and highlighting key points in the Bible where God shows his mission to all nations. That would be a good one.
So that was, just to say it again, it's The Abrahamic Revolution by Dr. Todd Arend.
Cool.
Yeah. And you have any more, Spencer?
I mean, as far as answering specifically your question, Scott, as far as biblical, I think the two that Sarah said would be the two that I would jump to directly. If you're just looking for more verses and you want to, biblically prove this, there's a lot more verses and a lot more stories in the Bible that we could jump to. I think another one, if you wanted to kind of focus more in on God's glory and our joy and how those work together, I think John Piper would be a great person to read some more. He has a book called Let the Nations Be Glad that does take a decidedly missions bent, but it talks about God's glory, our joy, and worship in the context of missions. That'd be a great connection. And then the last one, maybe just to mention briefly, is a book just trying to think about living with a purpose and just this theme that God has given us a purpose. And it's not something that we derive on our own, but God has clearly laid it out in the Bible, and he has invited us into his mission, this global purpose. And so that book, if you want, you could check out, is called Live Life on Purpose by a guy named Claude Hickman, who actually just lives out in the Inland Empire, out in Riverside.
Cool. That's super helpful. And maybe just before we close, to give a little bit of personal context to this, because I'd love for this to, I hope, spark conversations within our church, spark conversations within the cohort, right, as we have these discussions, and even spark conversations with the two of you. I'm super blessed that you're here. I'm super encouraged for that the Lord's both brought the two of you here with your heart and your training. I mean, you mentioned that you worked for the Traveling Team before. That's part of where even some of this came from. Can you give us like the little snippet of what that background is, what you were doing then, and how it relates to even the conversation we're having right now?
Oh man, we loved our time with the Traveling Team. It sounds really weird to a lot of people, but we basically packed up our lives into a suitcase and moved into a minivan. We didn't sleep in the minivan, but we traveled around in a minivan for about 9 months in the year. And that's what me and Sarah did for the first 4 years after we graduated. Anything to add with that?
Yeah.
Maybe what we kind of did.
Yeah, what were you doing?
Not just
You road tripping?
So why were we road tripping? Yeah. I wanted to,
it had a purpose.
we were living life on purpose for the mission of God. Yeah.
So we actually we would visit college campuses and partner with local Christian ministries, crew, navigators, Baptist student groups,
RUF.
any Bible believing group. We would come in and be their weekly meeting speaker, and we'd give this message, Genesis to Revelation, and talk about how God is calling us into his mission. And then we would help college students kind of talk through their next steps in this and how they want to go or send over some phone calls after we were there. So it was really fun to get to just see what God's doing on college campuses around the country and see how he's calling college students to like live their life for his mission.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that's such like what an incredible blessing for those students, both to have that unique time in life, right? Where you're thinking through some of these big questions, you're thinking through direction. And then in the midst of that, to be exposed to the mission of God and the way in which God has woven it throughout all of his word and all of history. And the reason I bring that up is because I feel really privileged and blessed that like we get to do that now. Like we get to do that right. Like that's what we're doing. And really what we've just talked about for the last hour is what you taught hundreds of times at campuses all over the country. And now in this season in life, like I just feel really privileged that instead of being all over the country, like you're here. And I know there's some blessings to that too for the two of you and for your family. But
we finally got to unpack the suitcases.
That's right. That's right.
I told Sarah I was excited about drawers, just open drawers. Anyway.
But you're here and both in LA and here at Cornerstone, and it provides this opportunity for us as a church family, as I think we do and we ought to be doing at every different stage in life, whether it's college, whether you're a young adult, whether you're newly married, whether you're a young parent, right? Whether you're an empty nester or about to be an empty nester, right? That taking these different moments in our lives to ask these same questions, that it's not just the college students in the world and the college students in our midst that are wrestling with the mission of God and how does he want me to respond to that. But this is something we all get to do together, and it's something we get to do as a church family right now in the midst of this cohort. And so thanks so much for being a part of this with us. Thanks so much for being a part of I know even just building out the cohort, it's been super fun to get to do together. I'm excited to see what the Lord does. If you're listening to this, know that we are praying for you. We're praying for your heart. We've been praying the Lord would work in some powerful ways through this. And it was super fun to kind of kick off the cohort this way with the two of you. So thanks for both lending your knowledge and for your time to do this.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. This has been a real privilege. It's fun to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, we're praying the Lord continues to work through it and work in your heart. And so we are excited to talk with you about it at our next cohort meeting. We will see you then. And feel free to reach out in the meantime too. Things we're excited to talk about in every season. So we'll see you then.